Alright guys, in this video, this is going to be the game plan video pertaining to Excelsius. More so game plans, strategies, different ways that you legends can go about utilizing Excelsius, all based on your preferences and desires. We are going to do this completely raw. There is no cuts or anything along those lines. I am going to show you exactly how I would go about utilizing Excelsius with all the different functionalities and features. We're going to be going through a bunch of different examples pertaining to different ways that you can maneuver through Excelsius and overall maximization when it comes down to Excelsius. So let's jump straight into it, guys. What I have here is as follows. I got all the pairs that I take a look at. So we got all currency pairs here, and we're even going to be dabbling into the crypto side. We'll dabble into the index side. We'll take a look at precious metals. We'll even dabble a little bit into the equities. I want to give you guys a taste of everything. Show you really what Excelsius can do, and more importantly, how you need to be using it so that you can too maximize it and take your trading to the next level. Let's jump straight into it. So when I get to Excelsius straight away, legends, let me tell you, you got to set the vibe. You got to set the theme. You got to set the tone for what's going on in the day. Dark or light theme straight away. If you haven't taken a look at that video, definitely take a look at that. But dark or light theme straight away. More times than not throughout the day, I'm on the light theme, and then later on in the evening, push to the dark theme. I'm not gonna lie, I've been gravitating heavy towards the original colors in the dark theme. I don't know, they pop to me, especially when I put the market structure candles on. But nonetheless, this is a vibe that I've been really moving with. And of course, you put one of my favorites, the rejection zones. It's like, it's just a lightsaber effect kind of that comes in. And yeah, I just think it is an overall vibe. But nonetheless, for the moment, we're going to stay with Excelsius's colors. Let's move through there. And let's really start from the top with regards to the signals and how I would go about looking at it from a signal standpoint and just in general, different ways that we can utilize it. So straight off the bat here, when I went ahead and selected the signals configuration, at this current moment, you can see that I have the take profit percentage at 1. It tends to be the take profit percentage that for me, I personally like to utilize with Excelsius. That works for me and my trading style, due to the fact that I do like to tend to look at the longer time frames. This is something for you to figure out based on, once again, the pair that you're trading and ultimately the market that you're trading. And we're going to be looking at that in a bunch of different examples, and I will show you guys exactly what I'm talking about when it comes down to the take profit percentage and why it's so important that you are constantly adjusting, and just more importantly, not adjusting all the time on the pair, but just adjusting on each new pair, new market that you go on, just so that, okay, you know what, boom, I know that the AUD pairs or the FX market or the crypto market, these settings are, money when it comes to this. And, when I go to this settings and these settings, and this is perfect for this type of market, right? And so that is really the goal in this regard. For the moment, we're going to stick at 1%, and if we happen to see that, some conditions are a little bit slower, some of them are a little bit choppier, and we got to change the conditions, we're going to, by all means. But jumping straight into it, what I like to do straight away is I always love to turn at least the signals on, personally, just because I think that the signals are amazing, but more importantly, I love to have that additional confluence when it does come down to what Excelsius is looking at, and more importantly, what is going on. Now, touching base a little bit more before we go into the whole maneuverability of it, what you'll take a look at right here is that you'll actually see that strong color candles, and we're going to go to the light theme here just to bring a little bit more light. Strong color candles are in dark for a specific reason. So when you do see a strong color candle there, ultimately that simply just means that you can expect a strong movement. Be mindful though, once again, and we're going to start really going into the signals here. When signals print, it's not verbatim that the signals are going to move exactly at that given time. You have to be mindful, and I stress this all the time. This is a game of probability, right? And so it's being mindful that you are utilizing everything in addition to Excelsius, and just being mindful that, all right, if Excelsius is indicating sell signals, buy signals, I want to be, once again, being mindful of also the other elements that Excelsius might be telling me, which is the rejection zones, the market structure, and more importantly, my analysis as well, right? Because we are using this as an added confluence to our trading. And so what you will see, though, more times than not, is that Excelsius is right on the money when it comes to a lot of entries. But be mindful, and as I've said before, you want to make sure that you figure out those settings because each pair will differentiate. For me though, like I said, I like to stick, between the 0.5% and 1%, but I'm also mainly staying on the, 1, 2, and 4, and of course checking the daily with the signals. And so, I don't really have need to adjust, but you might be that legend out there that, is ready to compete in, the London session or the Asian session or the US session, right? And so you're session based, you need volume, you need quicker, more reactive types of trades. Right, you can definitely go ahead and adjust that. So first and foremost, definitely figure out your settings on that side, and populate the signals straight away. Now, automatically on top of the signals, what I like to personally throw on straight away is all three of these settings. These are personally just what I absolutely love having automatic, and then I like to interchange the volume, the fibs, and the reverse, and of course I keep on the dashboard always. But I like to keep these three all based on what's going on at that given time. And so what this really does straight away is it paints me a really good picture in context to sentiment, right? So what I see straight off the bat, just by selecting the signals, the rejection zones, the market structure candles, is as follows. I'm seeing that market, no question, is bearish. I can definitely see that we're moving down, but I want to be mindful that, we are pushing into, just in general, the rejection zone, which we can see in the past, price will push off, right? And so I want to be mindful that I am moving into more of an extended region, and more of a sensitive region, and so I'm going to be careful of that. But automatically, this is giving me a lot of data straight away, and I'm just simply looking at it for what it's telling me. Now, on top of that, when I do go ahead and I turn on my signals and I turn on my configuration, sometimes I like to interchange as well. Like for example, right now I'll say, you know what, I want to get a really better sense of what's going on from the direction standpoint and structure. Let's take off the signals for now, and let's take off the rejection zones, and let's just really look at the structure in and of itself. And what can we see here is very simply that market went ahead straight away, and we can see that market is now creating a new low. We can see that there's a new part of development that is taking place in context to the structure. And watch, legends, if we went to the higher time frame, all of this blue will actually turn into pink because it's part of the bearish pressure. You see the business right there. There's no cookie cutter. I'm telling you, legends, exactly how it is. Let's go. So you can see, I cannot stress enough, Excelsius was designed by traders, for investors, for overall market participants, for anyone and everyone. It is amazing. It's incredible. You look at what Excelsius can do. It can do anything for you. I just simply there said, you know what, I'm going to turn the signals off. Let me take a look at the structure here. Let me really understand what's going on in the bigger picture. And by going into the bigger picture here, what I can see is that new structure is developing, that we're furthering this new bearish pressure that just happened by breaking through what was a very established developed market. And understand that this is the whole basis of utilizing these tools. It's not just, oh, let me turn on the signals and see when I can get involved in the market. Because by utilizing all of Excelsius's tools, you not only take your level of confirmation to a whole nother level, but you're trading as well. Because now you are forced to really look at everything. It's right in your face. You don't have to go search for it. It's right there for you. You don't even have to do the work. It's right there for you. It makes you an overall more aware participant in the game, a better competitor. And so going back into it, to start, I like to put the signals on, I like to put on my 3 tools. After I do that, I like to get a better sense of the direction straight away, right? So I'm looking at structure, gives me really good senses in that way. And then last but not least, once I have a really good understanding, a really good basis for what's going on, now it's time to create some game plans in context to how I would go about it. We're just going to use this example right here. There's no reason to move anywhere else. So now, for example, I've done, a good amount of work already. I've assessed the market. I understand we're moving bearish. We've just developed new points. I should definitely be looking for further sells. But let's be a little bit more mindful on what type of sells I should be looking for. If we go back, and the rejection zones and the institutional volume now are really important tools here, we can see one of two things. So in the bigger picture here, we're actually not pushing into anything too serious from a volume standpoint, mainly for the fact that we can see at this current time that volume is relatively light. However, be mindful that you are pushing now into this rejection zone here, which ultimately is giving us indication, as we've seen in the past when price pushes into this zone, that hey, we can expect reversals. We can expect some type of shift. Whether it's short term or long term, it's telling you that that's going to happen. So automatically, what I'm seeing here is that price in and of itself is slowing down, which is great, giving me indication buyers are coming in. But at the same time, I also want to be mindful that we're really not at anywhere of a sensitive point here, right? If anything, we're really at a point where, you know what, market's going to slow down, but maybe we actually can expect further continuation of this bearish momentum that just happened by successfully breaking these lows. Now, one thing I like to do in situations like this as well is I actually like to go ahead and say, you know what, I want to see where all the volume's sitting. Let me go to the weekly here, and then boom! You see now how it gives you a bigger picture and context to, okay, now I understand. I'm going to take away the rejection zones for a second here. I'm going to take away the market structure. Let's just look at the volume. And we can see now the volume in this example is telling us that, hey, we're about to push into a super sensitive region here, and we can expect some type of slowdown. And now this is where all the picture comes to play. The daily's telling us that market's going to slow down. The rejections are telling us the market's going to slow down, but still the market structure is telling us that we're going to be bearish. So it's short-term buys. We're still looking for sells in the bigger picture, and the volume profile is telling us, hey, you can expect some players to be coming here in the bigger picture. Makes sense why the daily's starting to slow down. But now this is where the game plans come in. This is where really the fun part comes in. For my legends that know market structure and the ones that do not, we're going to do a quick mini lesson. Trends exist in states of 4 points. They exist in a states of 4 developed points, which ultimately develop your trends. And same concept in the other way. And so what you can do now is mix and match the concepts of what's happening to potentially create a new one. What we can see based on what the market structure told us here, and I'm going to take off the volume profile and just put the market structure candles. We can see that the market structure just told us that we're creating new lows, and we've just established a new lower high. And so now if we look at the sequence of how a trend happens, it starts with an impulse, you'll see a pullback, and you see the continuation. We could potentially now expect that exact same context to happen if the trend is going to continue, and we can expect another leg. And so now it very much makes sense with everything that we're seeing in the chart, because the daily's rejection zone told us, hey, you're in a serious area. The volume profile on the weekly told us, hey, you know what, you're at an area where you can be expecting orders to start coming into the market. And so now it's telling us, and then last but not least, the market structure told us, hey, you just created new lows. So it's telling us that you should be looking for sells, but you can expect some slowdown, which now also gives you targets and potential areas of where you could expect price to come into before you expected maybe a further continued push. And without by doing anything, without by me putting a single line of analysis, I simply took all of that information based on what Excelsius told me, mixing and matching to create the perfect plan for that given play. This is what is so special about Excelsius. This is what is truly going to revolutionize and take your trading to another level. It helps you plan beyond words. It really keeps you mindful of what is going on in context to market structure. And more importantly, it makes you keep improving on a daily basis. I can't stress in words how incredible it is. Going back into it, now that I get a better sense of an understanding with everything, this is where the game plans follow. I like to go back now, take the institutional volume off. Let me get my rejection zones in here. I'm going to get my signals, and let's drop down now to the daily real quick and just see, all right, as we said before, you know what? We know that we're looking for sells, but everything's short term. If I want to play some buys, I can, but I got to be super short term. Be mindful though, and this is something to talk about. If you notice here, Excelsius is a hard trending algorithm. It does not break in context to direction. So just because you see these short-term pullbacks or these short-term plays, it's not going to start spitting buys unless the market sentiment should change, right? It very much should be that way and always be that way. However, I still didn't want to take away the flexibility for those that like to trade these counter short-term plays as well, which is why we wanted to make sure that we made sure that there was ways for you to counteract in the event that you get these plays, that you can play these short-term plays. And that's through the use of the market structure, the rejection zones, and your other tools. So as we were talking about before, we were saying, hey, we can expect some type of short-term buys in this bigger term sell picture. All right, let's take a look. And so, for example, now we're going to keep everything on, I apologize, and now we're just going to drop down into the smaller time frames, and we'll see, okay, you know what, if I want to take short-term buys, how can I do it? I'm going to utilize the market structure, I'm going to utilize the rejection zones, and so what can I see here? Obviously, I want to try to break down some structure for any type of short-term buys, unless if we break the lows, then I can look for those continued sells. But we want to be mindful of where we're pushing in context of that weekly and the daily. As we said, we are in a super sensitive area of the rejection zones, and secondly, on the volume profile. And so now you got two game plans here, because if you create lower lows, you can expect further continued movements, as we saw here. But secondly, more importantly, what you can also do is drop down to the smaller time frames and now look for structure plays for those short-term buys if you so desire. As you can see, you have high points being created now. What you can also see if we drop down a little bit lower is that also what you will also see is now further structure points developing, in which now you can start to go ahead and start competing in these short-term plays. Now be mindful once again, look how the rejection zones adjust based on your time frame. And so if you're looking for targets, right, even though you know that the daily looks like this and you're trading this leg and you're trying to target it for it till you get that continued sell, this is when ultimately now you start using Excelsius's tools and resources. You start using previous points of market structure, you start using the rejection zones, you can even throw on the institutional profile if you'd like. And if you'd like to use the fibs as well, by all means, you can definitely go ahead and do that too. And so what's really great in the end of the day is that you can really utilize all these tools. And notice right here, phenomenal example. You see the heavy amount of volume that was sitting right within here to the left on the institutional profile? Look what it did to price and cause an immediate pullback. This is the basis of what you want to be looking at, in addition to all the other tools. Price is pulling into a previous low here. We're pulling near these rejection zones. And you really want to be putting together everything that you're seeing. It ultimately increases the probability of what you are working with. And so for me, once I create my game plans, once in this example, we have a game plan and we're saying to ourselves, all right, rock and roll. I'm looking for short-term buys, short-term sells, because right now the daily's in and the weekly's in a little bit more of a consolidated region. That's why I'm going to be short-term. Let's go ahead and let's set up our game plan accordingly. So what I'll go ahead and do, what I'm going to do here, we're going to clear all of these, and we're going to just make sure, boom, all right. And so this is how it will work. I will then go ahead and right-click. I will add alerts. And for me personally, I always love straight away. I love, for the pairs that I'm watching, I automatically set autopilot on. Automatically. Now be mindful when you set autopilot, it's based on, once again, the take profit settings that you have set for yourself, because that dictates the level of frequency of trades. But for me, automatically, I want to have autopilot on, because it just, in the event that I happen to not make it to the chart, or I happen to just not get there in time, I have this available to me to be my second pair of eyes and ears. That's a first and foremost for me, personally. After I go ahead and set the autopilot, then I like to create my game plans accordingly. Now, in my opinion, I would only be taking really short-term buys over this short-term structure here, but super short-term into the highs, and I really don't want any sells until we got lower lows on here. And so this is a really good example, because depending on the time frame you set it in will dictate the type of alerts you also get in context to your game plan. So look at this. We're just going to keep right now the market structure on here. As I said before, we only have one lower high in Excelsius way, so by setting an alert here, the alert will go off and trigger. But if I go ahead and I start to say, okay, I want to set a lower low on Excelsius, right? The lower low will be triggered based on that most recent lower low, okay? If you happen to want the most lowest point, you'll have to move up in time frame to ultimately set that alert. As you'll see here, this will be the lowest point, and so by breaking, apologies, this is the next lowest point, and you have to keep going up in time frame if you want to get to that lowest point. But nonetheless, you will go ahead, and for me, right, I actually like the break of this higher low. I think it's a really good play. So what I'll go ahead and do now is add the alert on the time frame. Be mindful, you have to add the alert after you select the time frame. Add the alert after you select the time frame, and then select Excelsius, and from there I'd like this higher low to be broken. And so once that higher low gets broken, Then from there, I'm going to be alerted that a higher low is just created, a lower low is just created by Excelsius. And from there, we can expect continuations down. Same concept, and we'll go ahead and create. And from there, once we do go ahead and create, we will then see that our alert function here is set accordingly. And so in this case here, now we have Excelsius, which is on autopilot. And then secondly, we also have the higher low that we're looking for on on that specific time frame. When it comes to the autopilot feature, this also is going to be based on that time frame that you set it on. And so really, once again, you can mix and match accordingly. Ultimately, it just comes down to what the preferences and goals are. But even if you, for example, set this 15-minute alert, ultimately it's going to pop off based on that time frame. But you can still, of course, have your sequence alerts to keep you in line as well. And so that would be one example after utilizing all that Excelsius has given me in context to the data that I was provided. And now at this point, I have to do nothing except wait. I can go and check for further development of the structure. If there are new points that develop, for example, right now we're looking for this higher low to be broken, but who's to say that, you know what, this continues to leg higher, and now we have these further points that are developed that I want to start putting alerts on. And so that is one thing I can do, but in the moment until that happens, which happens with time, I simply wait. I can simply go to any other pair of my desire, of my choosing. And so that would be a basic game plan in context to how to utilize Excelsius. Now, I can't stress enough, and I'm so adamant about this in context to the customization and flexibility that Excelsius has. Let's say you're not the individual that wants to be so active when it comes down to the buying and selling, right? And that was just an example of if you're someone who's going to be a market participant and moving aggressively and really trying to move in that way. Let's say you're someone who, of course, wants to utilize the tools, but doesn't want to feel as intensified about strong sells, strong buys, I got to do this, this, and this, and instead just really have a better sense of the vibes of the market, of the momentum of the market, really how it feels. And so let's take a look into that perspective for a second. In this case here, what I would always recommend for those individuals is to completely take off the signals, and from there really just select the rejection zones, market structure candles. I always keep the dashboard on for everything because I love the dashboard, but this setting right here in and of itself does exactly the job for that type of participant in the market. This gives you a general overview with regards to market direction, market sentiment, and at the same time, the key and most sensitive points in the market. Now, as I explained in the prior video, you can really take, and move on this based on how you want. Let's say you have the individual that likes to look things from the longer time frame. You can ultimately do that and just really have a better sense and understanding of what is going on in the bigger picture. And so in and of itself, this is really, really neat feature because instead of you trying to do all the analysis, you can tell yourself, oh, hey, in this example, market was once bullish and now we are turning into a bearish state. Or for example, you go look at XRP and you can say to yourself, hey, market's been relatively bullish this entire time. Just this past week, we broke through a really sensitive point in structure. We did reach these previous points here. Let's see what happens. Do we now successfully pull back and cause for a new low? Or maybe we'll actually come back and break this entire region, which would allow then for price to really start flourishing back to the upside. And so another way that you can go about utilizing it, it really does come down to the preferences and overall desires of that individual. Neat little side tip here. Notice how sick it is the moment it breaks. It completely changes the color because now it's starting to move in context to the next structure that is taking place, the newest structure that is developing. Dynamic at its finest. And so when it comes down to game plans, it really just comes down to the individual's overall preference and goals. Now, you might be that also participant that says, I don't want to do analysis. I don't want to look at generally. I just want to know when the market is moving. And you can do that as well, just by setting your alerts and putting on the autopilot feature. Make sure you have the correct TP settings of your liking, and then simply set it on the time frame as well of your choosing. TradingView is very specific in context to where you set what and where and how. And so with that, it's important that you just keep those three things in mind when you're setting the alerts, which is making sure first and foremost you set the proper take profit percentage that you like, and then secondly the time frame that you also like. Now, on top of just being able to mix and match and move accordingly, the most beautiful thing about Excelsius is that it is constantly adapting. And so as market structure continues to develop, as market sentiment continues to develop, it moves with it. This is where these tools come in. This is where ultimately your entire system comes into play. If the market is getting faster, Excelsius will move with it. If the market is getting slower, Excelsius will move with it. It competes at the highest level. Now, running through some other game plans here, let me show you how I would go about, in a watch list perspective, how I would go about looking at my plays. Now, one thing real quick that I want to make mention of before we continue in context to going through charts, going through lists, being able to quickly scan plays and being able to say, okay, you know what, I want to look for further plays and things like that. One little tip that I want to show you as well is the loading of Excelsius. If you're an individual who really likes to chart on one specific chart, or in general really just stays on just a couple of charts, nonetheless, Excelsius loads all of its data once you go through those charts. So right now on the daily, it's loaded. On the 4-hour, it's going to take a little bit to load, but once it's done successfully loading, you no longer have to wait for that load anymore. The daily stays, the 4-hour stays, and this continues to happen in every time frame. And so I'll show you right here the 2-hour. Once we get the 2-hour to load, then we will go ahead and move into the 1-hour. Let's get the 1-hour to load. Just a little tip here. And once the 1-hour loads, then we'll get the 30-minute to load. And once the 30-minute loads, we'll go back and we'll take a look and just show how all of them loaded together. So now we don't have to load them anymore. They will just all be there based on the settings. So it's super cool as well, because then you can look at it, oh, this is bearish, but on the 2-hour, there was a little bit some bullish development here because we just broke the higher high. Maybe this is maybe now going to create a higher low for a higher high. Now, this is one other unique topic that I want to talk about just because we happen to be here and it just happens to be presented right in front of us, which is notice what happens. In this example here, notice how price successfully broke through this point here, so the color changed. But at the same time, not only did the color change, but notice what also developed here. It's indicating that now a new higher low has been developed by successfully creating a higher high. And so this will continue to establish as this continues to happen. And same concept, it will continue to say that in this example that this was going to be a higher low, right, when it was attempting to switch out of its direction in the bigger picture when we successfully broke. And so it attempts to preemptively assess where the next market structure is going to be until that becomes invalid. So for the moment right now, you see nothing's happening here because nothing has really developed. And this is the big thing to be mindful of, which is a super unique element. It ultimately develops based on how it's moving. So here's a really good example. You drop down to the 30, you see that this is a higher low. It's anticipating it's going to be a higher low because the most recent thing that we did was successfully break the highs, stating that we may get a new point in structure before a new place. Now this will ultimately start to change to potentially a lower high if we start to break down this market structure, which ultimately now comes into the bigger picture of that bullish momentum, basically saying, hey, you know what, we could expect some type of shift. And so it's always as well trying to anticipate what that next move is going to be based on what the most previous movement was. Always staying in line, never folding, staying tough on its criteria. Little tip. Going back into it, when it comes down to overall looking at all the markets across the board, looking at just different ways that you guys can quickly scan, for me, first and foremost, what I like to do, as I said, is I like to make sure that I have the normal settings that I have on, signals, and you can either have market structure candles, and rejection zones. But once you do have all of your settings that you like, I like to quickly scan, and I like to see one of two things. What was the most recent signal that had taken place? And secondly, what was the most recent market structure to develop? And if I want to be extra detail, where are we within the market? Are we in a super sensitive region using the rejection zones or the volume profile? What is going on? AUD-CAD would be a great example, and we set that sequence up. We're moving to AUD-CHF, very much the same thing. We get strong sells here, we just created new lows, but we're pushing into a heavy territory here. And so once again, maybe I have a similar game plan because now we're coming back above these previous lows here. Maybe I can expect even more of a shorter term play, but still being mindful that all of this momentum is bearish. And so these automatically now start really making me look. They start really making me think in context to, oh wow, what potential plays can we have available for us, right? And so this is what I continue to do as I continue to go through across all. I look at what the most recent plays were in something like this. We can see, all right, you know what? This definitely has been a little bit more of a consolidated structure here, right? We can see that we had some sells, we won, some sells, we got taken out, some buys got taken out, try to compete in this regard. You might say, well, why is it, sending sells, sending buys in this way? Well, watch this. If I take the rejection zones off without even knowing the structure, I can make the argument that price in and of itself is consolidated, right? Mainly for the fact that you can see that Excelsius in and of itself will not change its direction unless in and of itself the higher time frames are. And we take a look, and now we can very much see the market has been range bound. Market has failed to really change the type of structure that it's been doing for a very long time, right? And so what we can ultimately see in this example, I'm going to take off the signals as well, just to kind of ultimately see the consolidation, and we'll go to the higher time frames. That is why in this example you will see price just in general having discrepancies and having difficulties of establishing direction, because market in of itself is range. And when I mean established direction, I mean established direction in the long term. So when you look at it, right, now you can see, oh wow, for the most part it's mainly bullish, but we're just super consolidated. We haven't done anything for the last 5 or 6 months. It makes sense now when I go back down and I look at Excelsius and I look at Excelsius buy and sell signals. I understand why there's been a little bit of discrepancies with the buys, with the sells. Market in of itself hasn't been trending. Automatically, my mindset's short term. Automatically, I'm trying to be a little bit more on my feet when it comes down to these types of plays. And this is the basis of it all. It's taking the information of what's being provided to you, and it's making sure that you are, doing everything and anything that you can. Let's get away from the AUD pairs. Let's look at some of the Euro pairs here, right? We can look at, pounds, anything really. It doesn't matter in the end of the day. We are free to do whatever and whenever. That is the beauty of Excelsius. And so, in something like this is another really good example. We can definitely see that we have a nice strong sell printed. We can definitely see the result of that strong sell. But more importantly now, what this tells me here in the end of the day is that this is not something that I really want to be competing with, just because of look where we're pushing into. The sells were really good. If I happen to get them at the time, phenomenal. But now we're really pushing into a super sensitive area. It might not be something that I'm interested in. We can see that price just recently TP'd. Notice how I'm mixing and matching with just the data that's being provided. I'm not really looking for anything else. Let's try to look into more bullish environments and getting away from these bearish ones, right? Look at something like UJ. I just know it's a bullish environment. You can see here the complete opposite other way. You can see in this example, okay, we've been having a lot of buys. Price has been competing heavily in something like this. This is actually a phenomenal potential play. Let's take a look at why. What we can see is as follows. We're quite near away from the rejection zones, 1. 2, and if we take a look at the market structure here, take out the signals for a second, we are at a pretty significant point. We are at 2 lows, definitely indications of some bullish momentum. And lastly, put the cherry on top here, legends, we are getting some buys being printed. This is a great example in context to what we're going to do to take place. So here we are, we have the buy. As I said before, this is to be act as a confluence to your trading. And so let's create a game plan with this buy right now, legends. Let's drop down to the smaller time frame, and I'm going to see the market structure that's being created within here. I know the daily's printing a buy. I'm being mindful of that buy. And right away, I can see the exact point that I need to successfully get above if I want to see further continuation. I could take the buy verbatim of what the daily said, but I might have been late to that buy. And so with that, I'm going to use the market structure in addition to what is being provided to me so that I can have that additional confluence that I know that I'm going to be in the right direction. I can also throw on the rejection zones just to make sure that I'm being mindful of where I am in context to market. And lastly, while I'm waiting for my game plan, I might even go ahead and play around with the take profit settings just to see if maybe this pair happens to be a pair that tends to react a little bit better with maybe tighter take profits. We have 1% here. Let's drop down to 0.5% and let's see if this tends to react a little bit better. And we definitely can see one of 2 things just happen. If you take a look to the left here, by going down from 1 to 0.5, we had a tremendous amount of more signals being fired away and a tremendous amount of more take profits being hit. And so in maybe an environment like this might be something that is more suitable when it comes down to tighter TPs and more importantly, just quicker TPs because of the structure that we're dealing with. And this is the other thing that you want to be mindful of. Aside of just going in there, you don't want to just look at the signals and be like, oh, seeing a lot of stops, you got to make sure that you have the proper settings accordingly, mainly for the fact that each structure is going to be hit. Just because you see 45 TPs in one of there, that might not be what is appropriate for your trading style. You have to make sure that you adjust accordingly, right? And so after I go ahead and do that, after I'm creating my game plans, we're going last but not least here. And what we're going to do is as follows. Of course, we're going to be setting UJ on autopilot over here. Boom, done, set that autopilot. And then secondly, let's compete now. I don't want this lower high. I want this lower high. So I'm going to go to the 4 hour, okay? And now what I'm going to do is as follows. I'm going to now set, because this lower high already broke, now I can just go ahead, add my alert. When Excelsius gives me and breaks this lower high, which in essence would mean that you're creating a higher high, boom. You're going to go ahead and get that to be created. And vice versa. When you want to create a lower, when you want to break a higher low, you'll set a lower low to be created and boom, you will get that alert for that lower low. And so the biggest thing in something like this is just being mindful. That you can plan accordingly, not feeling that you have to be rushed because boom, a signal just went out. Use all the data that's being provided to you and make sure you understand what it is that you are trading, because some settings will be better than others for sure. This is another phenomenal example. After I set my autopilot alerts, I'm going to go ahead and I set my a higher high alert. I might even now start setting a sequence of alerts. Now I got higher high. Let's get a little bit more detailed, right? So what you see here is that we got Excelsius ready to go on autopilot right here at all times. Let me take this one off. I'm not sure why that was there. But now we got Excelsius on autopilot at all times. I also want a higher high on the 4 hour by breaking this lower low to be created. And I apologize, this higher low right here for AUD CAD, right? What we actually wanted on this alert, and let me go back in the event that you guys happen to set the alert incorrectly, such as I did, you don't want the higher low to break, but actually instead what you guys want is the lower low to take, right? So you actually go ahead and set a lower low to happen once we break a higher low. And so that's very, very important in context to market structure here. And so just to reiterate, when you want a higher high to be created, you can simply set it by breaking the high of the structure or the lower high of the structure. If you want a lower low to be created, you want to break the low of the structure or the higher low of the structure. These will ultimately signal what type of alerts that you want. And so be mindful, once again, if you want a higher high in the market, you have to either break the high or the lower high. If you want a lower low in the market, you have to break the low or the higher low of the market. So in this case, with the AUD CAD, if we want a lower low, you have to break the higher low. And on the UJ example, if you want a higher high, you have to break the lower high. And so what's really nice about this is that you can also say, you know what, maybe I want this lower high to be broken, but also if this develops new structure, I want to be aware of this as well, because I might want to compete with these buy opportunities. I might want to be on top of it 24/7. You can do that too. And what you'll go ahead and do is set an alert. You'll right click, go ahead, drop down, and in this case you want lower highs being created so that you can look for buys. You'll go ahead, you'll set the lower high tab once per bar close, of course, and from there, boom. You now have Excelsius there to alert you of potential lower highs as well as higher highs being created. So now when you look at your alerts column here, you can see you have Excelsius to alert you for any buy opportunity or in general. And then you now can also get individualized to create higher highs and to potentially develop lower highs for you to mix and match, this is what that will ultimately look like. This higher high alert is successfully by breaking above, which also goes in line with the daily's buy, or you also put a lower high to be developed by Excelsius, which would mean that further structure would develop, which would allow for you to take those buy opportunities as well. The possibilities are genuinely endless in context to the customization. It's completely up to the individual. Be mindful with what Excelsius is showing you and use the data accordingly. I want to take you over here real quick to the crypto side of things, away from the FX space for a second, and really show you why it's important that you are looking at different take profit percentages based on the market that you're in. So here we are on the crypto market. And on these markets that tend to be a little bit more aggressive, such as the crypto markets, the precious metals markets, the index markets at this current time, your TPs indefinitely should be a little bit higher when you are on the higher time frames. Remember that. Higher time frame trading should warrant higher TPs and vice versa. But this does not mean that you are not actively managing your position, that you are making sure that you're protecting capital, you're reducing exposure, you're mitigating anything that can harm you. It's important that you're mindful that Excelsius is that additional confluence. In something like this, I would actually recommend bringing your TP up to 2% maybe. Notice how many trades start to disappear. Maybe we'll go up to 5% because Bitcoin can move 5% in a day. Maybe you say, you know what, I want it to be 10% at a time. And this is why it's so important. It's so important that you make sure that you are adjusting accordingly. Because if you're not, you're going to not be able to maximize Excelsius's ability. And this comes down to making sure you're testing in accordance with your analysis. Some markets are going to be better with some settings. Other markets are going to be better with other settings. Use the data as a whole to bring your probability to a whole nother level. And so this is a prime example. Another prime example is the index space. The index space is an incredibly volatile space, especially in this time. What a buy by Excelsius, buy. But the index space is an incredibly aggressive space, mainly for the fact of all that is currently happening with regards to the world, especially in the last 2 years. This is something as well that you don't necessarily have to go so high, because we know that the S&P to push 10% in a day or 7% would be, of course, out of the norm. But it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're going to sit down here in the smallest thing and be taking a bajillion trades, right? And so in something like this, I very much recommend moving up, bringing it up, right? Because the higher the TP, in this case, it's genuinely trending a lot better for you. This is another prime example of how I told you Excelsius is a hard trending algorithm. It's not going to start bending or breaking when short-term structures change, and it should not. Any algorithm that is simply playing with fire, mainly for the fact that you want to be in line with where the direction of the market is. And so notice when the market makes short-term corrections, short-term once again, Excelsius is there to compete with no hesitation to start taking buys, to start competing. And so it's so important that you take a look at the data that's being provided, and more importantly, what Excelsius is telling you, and putting it all together. But once again, it's all designed for the flexibility and customization of the trader. That is the sole purpose that we designed it for. And so when it comes down to your game plans with Excelsius, I can't stress enough, the possibilities are genuinely endless. And I can't wait to see all the different game plans that you legends come up with. I hope from the start of this video till the end, you can hear my enthusiasm with every element pertaining to Excelsius, because there are so many different ways that you can move with it. I simply went through and grazed my watch list, picked pairs, and went about it as I would on a normal day, because that is what we are here to do, to marinate this into our everyday life and experience the advantage that we deserve. It's time we compete at the highest level at all times. This is going to conclude this video pertaining to game plans. If you have any questions on anything that was brought up, please do not hesitate to reach out. We're going to continue to keep developing these game plan videos. We're going to be getting into specifics. This is a never-ending process. Let's continue to grow and continue to experience the advantage. I'll see you all in the next video.